Hey, how's it going? So I'm gonna go over some of my traps in the chameleon variation of the Sicilian defense. So to kind of see what this chameleon is, it's generally when you do this knight to e2 move. This gives us a lot of kind of ideas of being able to do d4. We can even put the knight on c3 at times. It just gives a lot of flexibility. I will often transpose into like some sort of open Sicilian where I'll just play d4 or something like that. So I'm not saying avoid the open Sicilian at all. Don't avoid it. Um, but the idea of doing this knight c3 and knight to e2 first are people aren't familiar with it, for one. And two, it gives you a ton of flexibility. You can do the g3 here, you can do d4. I mean, the possibilities that you have are endless, and the possibilities for black are kind of endless too. But the really cool thing about a lot of the possibilities for black here are if they mess up, they mess up. And if they're not familiar with it, they're more likely to. These are kind of, I have like 21 or so traps that I kind of have found that you can kind of play in this variation. And I'm not saying they're perfect, they're not by any means. But what they do kind of cover is just, it's based on frequency of playing the games. So if you play 10,000 games, you should see these traps at least once, which, I mean, that's a lot of games. But the kind of ideas behind it are kind of consistent in various different positions in the same area. And I kind of feel like looking at traps, it helps me to understand tactics a little bit better. So without further ado, I'll just get started. I'll just go through these in order. This one is, you're not going to see this very frequently. It's kind of a fairly decently sized mistake by black. Bishop g4, and then we play f3, and then the mistake is actually bishop to h5, and then d4. So if you're looking at this, you'll see that black doesn't, they kind of just have the bishop here. It has no diagonals to go to. It's probably going to be attacked at some point. And if you look at this for the computer evaluation, it's +3 almost for white already. I know there's very few games with this, so you're not going to see it all the time, but it is something to keep in mind and just sometimes protect your king by doing f3 from like a bishop. And I'm not saying do that all the time, but sometimes the position calls for it. So, I mean, you have two monster knights. There, it's going to be a hard game from black's perspective. And if you look at like the win rate here, it's pretty good for white. I don't think your game's easy by any means, but it at least gives you kind of some opportunities there. So the second one, I think this one's also pretty uncommon. They just do e6, knight to e2, kind of staying in line with the chameleon. Then we do d4. Then it's very uncommon, but let's say they did c4. Then we just take, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, and it's about +2 or so. And I mean, you have a lot of pressure here. The win rate for white is really good at this point in time. And yeah. So, I mean, still, I mean, c4 is not the most common, but it's just something to look out for in case it's played. So I think this variation is a little bit more frequent. Like this e6 move, it's not the most popular. Knight c6 is more popular, but it is fairly high up there. d5 is fairly regular, so you do need to know how to play against that. They take, knight f6, we take, queen takes. Now we, of course, are attacking this kind of square here. They're going to defend it with knight a6, most likely. In little less than half the games, they do this queen e5 move. So this is actually wrong. We do queen e2, and what you kind of see here is you're still attacking this square. Their queen is pinned, it can't attack here. And you basically have to, if you capture, then you do knight a6, bishop to e3. So you're attacking this square, you're attacking this square. I don't think you really want to try to take this immediately necessarily. You still need to play carefully, but you can kind of get some of these kind of moves relatively quickly. So if they do bishop d7, castles, they're not going to want to take here. This would just, it looks like in a third of the games they do, but let's see what happens when they do that. We take, king there, bishop here, and I mean, even if you don't do bishop there, you do rook to d7. I mean, this, in a lot of these lines, it's really hard for black to play well. They do f6, this, there, and then, I mean, look at this. This is just, what are you going to do? You can do this. I mean, I think it's saying that the best move is actually to take here, king d8, then I guess you can do this, or rook d1, king c8. That's really strange. It just had checkmate in 8 or in 9 or so. Okay, so rook d1, king c8. Is it bishop takes here? No. Why is this saying... Oh, okay, rook to d. Oh, I completely missed that. So they do this, then you take. And I mean, there's just no defense here. It's pretty solid. I'm not saying you're going to get this all the time, but when you do, it's nice to know how to capitalize on it and know it for several moves and know why you have the advantage. So this is just something that I kind of try to keep in my arsenal, and just, it's kind of some of the moves that I think of. And I mean, if they don't play into your move order, all of these moves are based, like, this is the best computer evaluation. It's not played as frequently as the other three, but I mean, it has a huge win rate. It's +1 for white already. And it's just, it does look a little bit interesting, like you're just throwing your knight here. But I mean, it's played by 2,700 players. It's a good move for white. And I mean, it does look dangerous. Like, what if they just do a6? Then we have knight c7. But I mean, they're gonna protect it. Oh, it looks like the best move to protect it is queen e7. But in the almost 200 games, queen e7 has been played 0 times. The most popular by far is knight a6. Then you can just put them in check with knight d6. They take, queen takes. And I mean, look at this position for white. I'm not saying you're going to win necessarily, but this looks like a much easier game to play as white than it is for black. So if they don't fall for the opening trap or the trap here, you still have a great game. So let's say they do, so in this position they do e5. It looks like e5 it's not played incredibly frequently, but it is played a little bit. They take with pawn takes. They do e5, knight to f3, d4, and then, oh, this is a really fun one, because you take, then let's say that they take the pawn, take, king takes, and then you get their rook. I guess you don't have to take the rook right away. It looks like it's a little better to do bishop to c4. You can do that, but I mean, you're already winning here. Like, this is pretty clear. Like, bishop c4, it still protects the knight. You're going to take this rook anyways. It is good to keep in mind that sometimes, and I mean, in this position, it probably doesn't matter. You're quite a bit ahead, but some of the time, it's good to keep in mind that, yeah, you have a good move. You can capture the rook, but you can also just move the bishop here, protecting the knight. take the rook later. You don't need to necessarily rush it, except it looks like, maybe at further depth, bishop c4 doesn't work as well. I thought it was saying bishop c4 was the best, and then does it stop saying that eventually, or I thought it was saying at a further depth that bishop c4 wasn't recommended anymore. Sometimes it just makes sense to take the piece and take the win. I'm not sure. I thought it said bishop c4 was 0.8 or something, but let's see. I wonder about this b5 move. Bishop b3. I don't know. I mean, bishop c4 is probably good. I don't see a problem with it. I thought it said it was equal, but maybe I just missaw it. Not a huge deal. Let's move on to the next one. This is another one in this kind of line. Bishop. Oh, so another thing to kind of always look out for is, I mean, bishop b5. Like, pinning the knight to the king, it sometimes brings about different tactics that you can apply. It doesn't necessarily lead to one. I think if they played perfectly here, it does look like white's winning, but it's not an easy game whatsoever. Recommends taking, knight takes, knight. Oh, and then this is fun, because you do queen takes on d4. They do bishop takes. I'm going to hide the eval for a second. Bishop takes. Now, you're not actually... How do you get this bishop back? So, I should have done that, but you can do this queen to e5 move, which they probably won't want to protect their queen. I guess they could move their king here. So what happens if they move the king there? This one I'm actually kind of curious about. I'm wondering about bishop to f4, but it looks like it's protected there. I'm sure I'm missing something kind of major here. Guessing bishop f4, but maybe I'm missing that. Bishop f4. So I wonder if they've ever played king to d7. Then I guess the most common here is queen f5. Doesn't look as strong as, I mean, bishop f4 says +8. So if you do this, it is good to know the follow-ups. Let's say they did. Wow, that's kind of cute. Bishop e2. I don't think many humans are going to play that move, but let's say they more likely do like the king c8, or I guess it's hard to find ideas that are okay for black here. So I mean, if you just think of it, maybe we just do rook to c8 maybe, and then they're probably getting checkmated. Oh, we're threatening this queenside castle. I mean, look at this pressure on the king. The compensation is, I mean, it's saying +16. If they do that, you just check and then you take their queen. So it's not, so you have a lot of kind of attacking power here. There's not really anything specific on I mean, I think there's a lot of moves that you have, but you have to kind of keep up with kind of all of this. There's a lot of moves they can make, but just knowing that they're under so much pressure, you're probably going to want to castle queenside. Um, I mean, if they do bishop to e2, you can't castle queenside, but you just take the bishop, and you're definitely ahead. So if they do the more common knight to e7 or bishop to e7, bishop to e7 is considered a bit better. Let's look at knight to e7 because, I mean, +6, definitely much nicer. So then we just do knight to c7. Then I guess there's king to d7 here. And then it's saying that queen takes on b5 is good. I'm kind of curious about king takes there. That looks like it is very dangerous if they take. They're probably going to take if that happens. Bishop to f4. They're probably not going to do queen to d6. Rook to d1. So let's say, where can they move the queen? If they move the queen away, you can move the queen here and you get checkmate. The best move, it says, is knight to d5. Kind of curious about rook takes on d5. I guess bishop d6. Why didn't they do bishop d6 instead of... Oh, they couldn't. So I guess the idea of knight to d5 is this bishop to d6 move. You can then take... And, I mean, we don't need to go down this line any farther. It's pretty obvious that it's pretty nasty for black. So in this case, let's say takes, knight c6, bishop b5, so bishop d7, pawn takes pawn, knight takes on d4, bishop takes on d7, and then queen takes on d4. So let's look at this move order a little bit. So in the previous example, I think that this pawn had already taken back, and that's a different story than if they do knight there. So let's say that they did pawn takes, then we can just do this knight takes on d5, and then this knight takes on d4 doesn't work as per the previous example. But if they don't take the pawn and they take on the knight, you don't really, like, it's not bad, I guess, to play queen takes on d4, but you don't get as strong of a follow-up as before. And you can just do bishop takes on d7, queen takes. I mean, they're probably not going to take with the king. I mean, 379 games, 379 times taken with the queen. So take with the queen there, knight f6. And then here, bishop e3. So I don't know why bishop e3 versus like bishop g5. It's between like 0.3. I think bishop e3 is a good move. I think bishop g5 is a good move, but let's just play bishop e3. Knight, pawn takes on d5, or knight takes, doesn't really matter. I think if knight takes, then we probably want to take with the knight. Pawn takes, we castle, because we can't trade it yet. If they do rook to d8, then what this is recommending is now doing either g4 or bishop g5, or bishop h6. So this bishop h6, it's an idea in a lot of traps. It's actually really pretty to sometimes do this. I mean, if they take here, this is devastating. Like, you're attacking the rook. You're probably going to do this at some point. There's not much choice to do. I mean, if if you move the bishop, you take there. How do you protect this rook? Do you move it? I mean, this is suggesting doing like queen to c6, and you can just take it. But, I mean, I think the best move for black in this position is to resign. So, this bishop h6 move, let's say they don't take it. It looks like in most cases they don't. It's pretty clear that the game's over if they do. Then we do queen to e5, queen to e6, rook to here, queen takes, rook takes, king to d7, knight takes on d5, and it's game over. So, I mean, like, look at the pressure that white has here. This isn't an easy game at all to play from black's perspective, and it's kind of all leading up from, like, I guess, here, where you're +2 almost. I mean, they don't have to do this exact move order, but you have a lot of compensation for the position, in the position. So, let's look at this one. I think that this is just a small variant on what we just kind of looked at. Something I will, I'll talk about that at the end of the video, but I'll just bring it up now, and I'll bring it up then too. But you can actually go to this export button, and you can export this entire study, and then you can throw that in somewhere like Chess Tempo or something to practice some of your openings. So I'll often do that with some of these as well. So queen takes, knight f6, most popular, bishop e3, knight takes on d5, knight takes on d5, queen takes on d5, queen takes on d5, pawn takes queen, queenside castle, bishop takes on a7. So, I mean, this attacks that pawn there. This is a hard game to play from black's perspective. Like, you got that kind of pawn here. Yeah, I mean, you're just continuing to put on the pressure after they've made some kind of early mistakes. That, I mean, they weren't major mistakes, but if you know how to keep applying pressure in positions, you can win a lot more games than you would otherwise. Alright, let's see this one. Knight c3, e6, knight d5, d4, pawn, knight c6, bishop b5, knight e7, pawn takes pawn. And you're already +3. So, I mean, this isn't going to be the most frequent response. It's only 146 games. But knowing just to take back, they'll probably take here. Castles. A6. And you can take, but do bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, and then you're applying pressure here as well. And otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of pressure over here. It's a hard game for black to play. You're probably going to take the knight at some point and take this pawn. Say that it did bishop d7, rook e1, knight takes on d4, queen takes on d4, bishop a4, queen takes, or recommends actually knight taking. It looks like they're almost even. I like doing something like this. Don't play queen d4. Looks like it's basically gets rid of a lot of your advantage. Curious about queen takes on d7. That was my first impression, like where you, oh, I guess you want to leave the king here. Kind of curious about, oh, you have to take that first. They're going to do queen to d7. it says to do queen to a5 here. And what we need to keep in mind is we want to take this pawn. If we do queen to a5, it prevents the king from going to this square. And they need to protect this pawn somehow. So if you do queen to a5, this pawn, it's going to fall. I'm pretty sure. They do rook to d8, then... oh, wow, it looks like they've actually played this game, and white did... It looks like black must have played pretty well to come back from this. Bishop e3, knight c6. I recommend bishop c5, check, bishop e7, then rook takes e7 isn't as good as queen to a3. So, I mean, rook takes e7 is the second best move. It's not bad. It still looks difficult. Kind of curious. Rook takes, knight takes, I guess rook to e1. Oh, he took with the queen? And then I guess, oh, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop takes. And I mean, it's not, white is definitely ahead here, but it's not clear by any means. So these are just some ideas so that you can get a slight advantage. You're not going to necessarily win every game in a checkmate or something like that, but having a rook or something versus a knight, I think it just allows you to hopefully get to a good end game and ideally win your games. So let's look at this position. It's kind of the same approach. Knight c6, bishop b5, queen b6. So if you see here, queen b6, I guess it's the second most popular move, but it's bad. Pawn takes, and then I'm kind of curious as to why this is bad. Oh, okay. I think I might have even played this before in game, but basically you're attacking this square. They can do queen to c5, then you can just move the knight there. I think one of the things to keep in mind is this can't, why don't, oh, if queen takes, oh, you don't need to have, if the queen takes, you can just take with the queen and the knight's pinned. So keep in mind that the knight is pinned. This bishop's protected by the knight. You can't do this and then take because the knight is pinned. Let's say they do that. Bishop d2, queen d8, then knight takes on c6, and then, I mean, this is a pretty clear win for white. It's not going to be the most common, but that's probably why you don't see queen to b6 more frequently. It's going to be in about a little less than 10% of your games at this position. So, I mean, it's kind of nice to be able to see it even that frequently. I mean, it's not all the time, but winning 10% more games or so, it's really awesome to do. So, anyways, let's go on to this one. Knight takes, c takes, queen takes, knight takes, knight f6, knight takes. I think we've done a lot of these lines before. Knight a6, bishop e3. And this is almost the exact trap we've seen before. I think they just took with the pawn instead of another with the queen. But as you see, some of these ideas are consistent across the various games. So this is if they do the most popular line, knight c6, d4, takes, takes, and then I guess bishop b4. Now we do knight to b5, and I mean, I do want to point out that this isn't bad. I actually play this position sometimes from black's perspective with having done knight f6 first. Um, but it's not bad, but let's say they do a6. And I think a6 is now essentially immediately bad. We do knight to d6. Um, Oftentimes they'll take with the bishop. And I mean, look at that queen. You're kind of completely blocking in white's position. It's going to be a hard game. They do queen to e7 because they're feeling the pressure. And notice that queen to e7 isn't even listed here. And then we just do queen to g3. Attacking here. Like, I guess queen to f6, bishop g5, like, this is, or it recommends even doing bishop e3. But knowing to do queen to g3, attacking this square here, I mean, you're putting them in a world of hurt. So the most popular here is bishop g5. Bishop d3 is also popular. Bishop e3 is the best move. I don't actually know why entirely. Let's look at knight e7. Queenside castle. Then it looks like castling is like the #1 favorite. And then I guess maybe this at some point. Let's say they do d5. Now we can do bishop g5. I kind of am curious about whether white was cheating or not here. Okay. So I guess that's why white won this game. They were cheating, but why is bishop g5 better than like h5 or something? Let's look at it. Then I guess queen to e5 is the best move. Why did moving that pawn up change things? Why did that change things? Let's just say they did a5. Bishop g5 is still the best move. They do h6 prevents it. Queen g6 responds to it. The threat of bishop g5 is stronger now. Why didn't we just do bishop g5 here? Queen g6. Oh, because if they did queen g6, we could push this pawn. So now they have a pretty clear, I guess, f6 move. And then you can't really push because they just take. So why don't we do h4 early though? And then they have to do queen to g6 or h6. But this transposes, I thought, to like the same line as if we do bishop e3. Why is it helpful for there to be a waiting move here? I'm going to say that I think that h4 is just the best move. If they don't do h6 or queen to g6, they basically have lost here. Because the pawn can move up and the queen would be trapped if they don't do h6 or queen to g6. So let's say that they do queen to g6. It looks like there's a lot of moves that you can do. Let's see, queen to c7, queen to h2. I don't really understand queen to h2. I just don't. Why? I guess you're keeping that diagonal and you're not trading queens. I think the biggest point here is to not trade queens because, I mean, their queen right now is in a position where they're likely to get trapped. I like this queen to d6 move and this queen to c7. What I like about queen to c7 is it's kind of all up in their business. It's hard to do anything. And I like this queen to d6 because, I mean, the queen is kind of a monster here. It's hard for them to really do much. I think the computer is kind of saying, let's do queen to h2, get out of the way, because it doesn't really matter what they do over here. They're probably going to lose their queen. So let's do queen to d6. And then, I mean, the best move it says is e5, because they're still trying to trade queens. So I guess maybe that's why queen to c7 was a little bit better of a move, because now the queen also has an extra square here that it might be just a little bit harder to attack. So I guess the reason for doing queen to h2 or queen to c7 as being better is to prevent this e5 move. So let's just say we did queen to c7. Now, like, what their queen's running out of squares to go to. Let's say that they do knight to e7. h5 is really high up there. It has some others in there, but let's just do h5 because I think that that's probably the most clear to kind of get an advantage. They do queen to f6 and then just h6. So we're trying to attack over here. It looks like rook to g8 is considered one of their better moves. Knight to b4. I do like the knight to b4 move. Let's see how we do. Oh, just defend the pawn. If they take, who cares? Then it recommends d5. I think that if you wait, like, black's probably concerned with losing their queen. I mean, for good reason. And this, I think that this kind of is trying to open up a little bit. I think if you take here, that, I mean, you can actually, I think black starts to get further and further back into the game. Are we even, I don't think we're any material up right now. But I don't know why king to f1 is considered the best move here. Why? These computers, like, they confuse me. Like, I just, who's gonna play king to f1 here? Like, why? Why did you just play king to f1 for no reason? Looking at the move, I don't see why we did it. Like, let's say they do this, pawn takes. Why not just g takes on h6? Oh, rook takes, queen to g7. Alright, this is going a little bit over my head, or quite a bit over my head. I still don't know why we did king to f1 here. E takes on d5, knight takes on d5, knight takes on d5, pawn takes on d5. I mean, I see that black's position is difficult, but why is white +7? Rook h5, queen g4. Oh, if you ever move the queen, we have this check here, which would basically fork the king and the rook. And I guess white is threatening this, bishop to h6. Let's say they just do bishop to e6. Then, oh, queen takes on b7. So what I'm going to say here is I don't know entirely why this is crazy advantage for white. I don't know how to get that, and you have to play perfectly for like 20 moves or so. I think it's pretty obvious that the game is very difficult from black's perspective, but I don't think this is a clear win by any means. I think if you're able to figure this out, you're a much better player than myself. Looking at the computer, I see that white's winning. I don't see why they're +5. Um, but I mean, I think some of these game moves are just. It is good to keep some of these in mind, but it's going to take me a while before I'm able to play at a level to really capitalize to this extent. I think that, I mean, I think I can play this position without too much difficulty. I think there's a lot going on here, and I think it's a lot harder to play from Black's perspective. I probably wouldn't do this king to f1 move. But, I mean, if you want to, like, spend some time, play against the computer, see how you can win in some of these circumstances. Probably will take a while before you can really completely dominate, but it is an interesting position to play. I'm going to move to the next one. They do knight c6, d4, pawn takes, knight takes. How often is bishop b4 played? Actually, fairly frequently. Bishop b4, knight to b5. So, in a lot of these kind of examples, you're going to see this knight to b5, attacking these two squares. They do bishop takes. I think we just do pawn takes. So, I mean, it's definitely a good position for white if the bishop takes. Don't take back with the knight, because you're threatening a lot right now. So pawn takes, if they do, I guess the most popular is d5. And then you can either take back. The best move is definitely bishop to a3. I think allowing you to go here. Let's say they do this, knight to d6, king to f8, and then it says queen to h5 or queen to f3. It says queen to h5 is a little bit better, and I think that's because g6, like, you could possibly move the queen here. You can do this right now. They probably move the pawn up. Takes pawn. Guess if they took with the knight, you can just move the pawn up. Like, seeing this, I would probably take with the g pawn, I think. And then queen to h5, knight to e5. And then I would probably have played this. This is king to g8. And I don't see why. But if I played this, we'd easily see why this was a much better move. Oh, the king has literally no squares to go to. You can attack here. If they move the rook here, you get checkmate in 2 moves. Here, knight, checkmate. So, doing this queen to h5, definitely a strong move. And then after they do this move, moving here, like, sometimes it really makes sense just to lock down the opponent's king a lot. So let's say we look at this position, knight c6 again, knight takes, bishop b4. Let's say we do knight to b5, they do this d5. So d5, not the most common, but it is fairly common. We take, bishop f4. So we're then threatening with the knight here. They have to protect, so they do bishop a5, knight to d6, king to f8, and then we have a free pawn. So, and then if we also take here, you're threatening checkmate here. So they do something like bishop to e6, and then we just retreat. And then we're also still attacking this square. Lots of pressure on black. We're a pawn up. Oh, what more can you ask for in an opening? You're +4 according to the computer. So as you see, this bishop b4 move, it's seen in a lot of these kind of traps after they do knight c6, knight b5, d6, and then a3, bishop takes, pawn takes. And I'm not going to say always take back with the pawn. You need to think about it, but I mean in this position you have a lot of pressure from the knight there. Knight to f6 is the best move. The most common move is d5. Pawn takes, and then pawn takes, and then bishop to f4, threatening here. So what they'll probably end up doing, I guess, is queen e7, bishop e2, and then I guess knight e5, queen takes d5. And now you have double attacks on there. They do f6, queen side castle. And I mean, you're really just dominating here. It's not necessarily one single tactic that's clearly going to win there, but I mean, you have so much pressure on them. It's good to learn what some of the attacks are in some of these positions, because I mean, I will say that I like this position as white, but I don't necessarily see it personally as being +6. Now to the next one. Another knight c6, d4, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop to c5. So we do this, of course, again. As I said before, we do this a lot of times. They do d6, we do bishop f4, they do e5, bishop e3, bishop takes on e3, and then this one is actually kind of fun. Takes on d6, king to e7, then knight takes on c8, rook takes, knight to d5. We don't just take the bishop back with the pawn because that weakens our position a slight tad. Like, I mean, it's not bad to do, but I mean, this is still slightly better. Like, let's say they did king to f8, and we're taking the bishop back. So, I mean, is it bad? Like, is it bad to just take the bishop with the pawn? I mean, you got a free pawn there. It's not bad by any means, but this is opening prep. So knowing this ahead of time, you can get that slight edge, not weakening your pawn structure, getting that free extra pawn, having their king unable to castle. It's just a little bit better. And I mean, it's not a clear win by any means, but it does, your game is going to be pretty good here. So now this, let's see, bishop c5, knight to d to b5. So I think at the end we're actually going to get to the most common variations. So anyways, d6, bishop f4, and I mean, I do think it's a good idea to play moves that if you see this, when I'm giving the advice in here, I'm not saying just to play a move because it's the most popular. But if something has a 64% win rate, the best computer evaluation, a better win rate than anything else in this category, besides against bishop to g5, which I don't, how does this have a good win rate? I don't know. I wouldn't recommend playing this, but if something has such a high win rate, has the best computer evaluation, has 500 something games played with it, I would recommend doing it. There's no reason not to play the best move if it's going to help you win. I do think it's good to give your opponent traps, things that they have to think for. Let your opponent make mistakes. Don't just play the most popular move because it's the most popular move. But if something happens to be the most popular move and is by far the best and wins you the game, do it. So bishop takes on e3. We take with the they take with the bishop. Then we do this whole ordeal, and then I think this just chose the two different variations for king e7. And I guess for king f8, it recommends taking with the pawn. Oh, because if they did king to e7, we have check there. So if we didn't have check, it does change the position slightly. Just take back here, and you're good to go. You're a pawn up, better position. They can't castle. What more can you ask for? So this, knight c6, d4, pawn takes, g6. Knight from d to b5. I mean, you're already winning basically here, but I mean, look at this: 565 games, 74% win rate, and it has the same computer evaluation. Let's say they do d6, bishop f4, e5, knight to d5. Well, these are some fun things you can do in this variation. I'm not going to go into that one too much more detail. Bishop g7, d4, pawn takes, knight takes, queen b6. We're already plus 2.7. And then, that's interesting. At depth 26 is plus 2.7. At depth 20 in the next position, it's 1.1. It does recommend bishop takes on c3 as the best move. Then knight takes on c3. If they do a6, knight to d5, queen to a5, bishop d2, queen d8, knight from b to c7. And then, so what it's really capitalizing on, if they do this a6 move, is your knight's protected by the bishop. If we go here, we have a double attack on here and the queen. And then we can move one of these knights there. So let's look at this line. F6, e5. So if they do knight f6, just kick it away. Not all the time. I often play, and I mean in this variation, just do e5. Knight g8, d, and then knight f3, d6 is fairly common. Pawn takes, and then d4. So why is this so good? Say they take, then it recommends bishop b5. You can also just take with the pawn. Let's just take with the knight and then move on. I mean, I see it definitely being in white's advantage, but why is it plus 2? We're not any material up. Let's say they do the most popular knight f6, bb5, bishop d7. Queen to f3. Knight c6, takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. So it looks like you can kind of get into this circumstance where you're using the queen, attacking here. This is attacking there. They're probably going to want to do something like that. It's kind of a nasty position, and they're a pawn down now. So, guess that's why. Anyways, that's all the traps I had. I hope that this was useful for you. By all means, export the chapter PGN. Go to this export tab export it, put it in a tool like Chess Tempo or something, and that'll help you to kind of learn some of these lines. Thank you again for watching. I hope you have a great day.